Hello everyone. My name is Leo Selvaggio, and I use he, him, his pronouns. And I'm with the Brown Arts Institute as of about a month ago. Yeah, we just switched over. And so welcome to this workshop that I'm titling So My Podcasts. And I want to take a moment to thank Elsa for inviting me here today and giving me the opportunity and kind of to challenge myself on what it would be like to run a workshop for faculty in this specific kind of space. Usually we do one-on-one consultations, but this is kind of like a new venture for us. So we're in beta, so any feedback is definitely appreciated. But a little bit about myself. My background is as an artist and designer, and I work at the Multimedia Labs here at Brown. We're a set of creative technology spaces that provide access to the community of Brown to things like video production, podcasting, virtual reality, augmented reality, all different types of things. And when I say Brown, the Brown community, while students are our bread and butter, if you will, we provide services and access to faculty, instructors, staff, anyone that's affiliated with Brown. So you could become a member yourself and leverage some of these trainings and tools as well. So before we get started, can I ask how many people here are podcasters already? Okay, great. How many people have told their friend a really juicy story? Let's take juicy out of it. How many people have told their friend a story at some point in their lives, right? Okay, great. So you're all capable storytellers, and podcasting is just storytelling and recording it. So to that end, you already have a lot of the skills required to make, produce, and also critique and deconstruct podcasts. So a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be discussing how podcasts can be beneficial to both students and instructors. We'll also look at a few examples of podcasting being used in courses at Brown here. We will take a look at the overall process of what it takes to make a podcast. We'll experiment with making some of our own audio recordings so that you get a feel for what that's like. And then we'll also learn about some of the resources here at Brown, as well as ones that we've created that are a little bit more open to instructors everywhere that can help get you started in your journey with podcasting, whatever that might be. So I want to start with a kind of a quick question of, I'm assuming that most of us probably listen to podcasts or consume it in some way. Why do you listen to podcasts?
To pass the time in the car.
Okay, so time killer. Okay, that's good.
The story is really good.
Stories.
The story is engaging.
Okay. Anyone else?
Keeping current with events.
Okay, so it's a form of news for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so information gathering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Same. So more news on your side.
So like history podcasts.
History podcasts. Okay, love that. Great. So we're going to start with a little kind of like icebreaker that we call a pair and share. So I'm going to ask for you to break into groups of two. Maybe Elsa, if you wouldn't mind working with our participant on Zoom. And maybe the three of you could work as a group of three. And you're just going to ask yourself one of these two questions. What's your favorite podcast and why? Or what brings you to this workshop? And we'll take about 5 minutes. Sound good? Awesome. So it was really great hearing some of your stories about why you listen to podcasts and some of the things that you're interested in. So instead of just showing you all slides, I thought, why don't we listen to something? So I got to somewhat interview through email to people that I consider experts in podcasting and created my own little audio story for you all. It's about 8 minutes. And I think it'll give you an overview of what it might be like to use podcasting in your research or in your courses from the perspective of people here at Brown that are already kind of doing that.
Hi there.
My name's Leo Selvaggio, and this is So Why Podcasts? I've spent the last couple of years learning about podcasts, teaching others how to edit audio, and making small audio stories like this one. And it's been pretty clear to me, at least, that podcasts are really having their day on Brown's campus. They're in courses, as part of scholarly research, in student groups. It's everywhere. And I really wanted to get a better idea of why this is. So I asked a couple of our resident experts about why podcasting has become so popular at Brown. So, why podcasts?
So it just is a lot of fun.
That's my colleague and instructor,
Megan Hall, and I teach a course at Brown called Podcasting for the Common Good. I also am the host of Possibly, which is an environmental podcast that comes out of the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society, and the host of Humans in Public Health, which is a podcast for Brown School of Public Health. So it just is a lot of fun. I've just always loved telling stories with sounds. The cool thing about podcasts is you just can really expand the possibilities of what you can do with sound.
I think one of my favorite things in the world is when you have a really good, meaningful conversation with someone you've known for a while, someone you just met for the first time.
That's my fabulous student worker,
Lucy Jones. I'm a creative technology assistant at the Multimedia Lab at Brown with a specialty in audio. I think it takes vulnerability to fully be present in a conversation and to let yourself into the eyes of another, or the ears of another. Maybe that's more accurate. It's a different kind of conversation. It requires an intentionality and the kind of active listening that I don't always do.
You know, when I start with raw sound,
that's Megan Hall again.
I sort of chip away at it and keep chipping away until I really get at the essence of whatever someone is saying or the essence of the story.
It means listening to pauses and breaths and ums and ahs and remembering parts of a conversation that you really liked and transcribing them and finding sound bites that fit your piece but speak to a larger narrative.
But what about teaching with podcasts? I've worked with a lot of instructors that have wanted to incorporate audio storytelling assignments into their courses as alternatives to a final paper, or just to be more multimodal in their teaching. It's probably no surprise that Megan Hall would say,
teaching podcasting is a lot of fun. I would say that it sort of feels like sculpting to me. But, you know, it's a messy process. I still feel like it's messy. And for me, creativity is messy. And that's okay. I think the students really hunger for concrete, practical skills. And they can walk away from my course thinking about audio and sound, but also actually making something at the end. And then they can use those skills for whatever idea they have.
So I think the main thing I've learned is how to be a better listener.
That's Lucy again.
Or maybe a more intentional listener. And I mean, I think that's really important just for connecting with other people. There's kind of this idea that like analytical papers are always going to be kind of dry and boring, especially in an academic sense. But I think people inherently think podcasts, oh, you need to capture someone's attention for this amount of time. And so I think it pushes students to take what they've learned and kind of synthesize it in a more accessible way for an audience, which is, I think, a very useful skill.
And making podcasts aren't just beneficial for students. At Brown, we've seen many examples of faculty, staff, and departments embracing this mode of presentation. Megan has some experience with this.
You know, that's often sort of the traditional track for an academic, right? You do your research and you publish it in a fancy journal if you're lucky, and then experts read it. But podcasting circumvents all of that, and it allows you to share your knowledge and your skills to a much broader audience. You reach more people and you reach them so quickly. You can reach them in the moment.
Which sounds a lot like what Lucy was saying about student learning.
Take what they've learned and kind of synthesize it in a more accessible way for an audience.
And we saw how important that was during COVID. You know, there were a lot of great people coming out of Brown that were on podcasts or wrote blogs or newsletters that reached people and gave them information as soon as they needed it. And podcasts offer something that's a little different from maybe a blog post or a newsletter, in that when you hear someone's voice, it's emotional. When you hear someone talking, when there's a conversation happening, you make a connection that you don't always make when you're just reading something on a screen.
Or as Lucy already mentioned,
So I think the main thing I've learned is how to be a better listener.
so what advice do my two experts have for those thinking about adding podcasting into their practice or courses? Well, Megan warns us against defaulting to what's simple.
There's so much you could do to explore. The sad thing is a lot of podcasts are just people talking at each other, and they really don't take advantage of the medium, which is that it's something you listen to. So I love playing with sound, finding ways to use recordings, have people interact with sound. That's what makes podcasting fun.
Our student expert Lucy seems to agree here.
I would also let go of any expectations you have that you might use to judge a more traditional analytical essay. A podcast is a very different form of media, but I think podcasting really suffers if you have nothing that hooks the listener in. So I would encourage your students to mess around with sound, to think about what they can get out of the auditory medium that they couldn't do in a written format. Going through the process of finding sound that works for you means normally you're going to be doing more research than you would otherwise. I would just be really open to ideas that students have. Let them take it wherever their interests lie. Podcasts will be better if the creator is inherently interested in the subject matter.
So, where can students and instructors alike find resources to start teaching or working with podcasts?
I would direct them to the MML.
That's the Multimedia Labs at Brown.
Because it's a great resource, not a shameless self-promotion, but just the truth, or both maybe. It's just a good place to find resources, and lots of students have encountered the same problems that your students have, and you don't have to have all the answers, but it's really good when there's peer-to-peer learning and people know what resources are available to them.
Thank you for listening to So Why Podcasts. I'm Leo Selvaggio, and I want to thank Megan Hall and Lucy Jones for contributing to this episode. Megan, why don't you sign us off?
I'm really excited to see this world grow at Brown, and I hope we can think of ways to collaborate together and continue to make awesome work. Thank you.
The Germans knock.
I like that. So, what did you hear? What kind of nuggets from the advice of Megan and Lucy kind of stood out to you?
I've always liked in the podcast I listen to the incorporations of music, not only as like an intro, outro, but also during speaking. And then I love that bit about listening and hearing these ums.
Yes. Yes. So I did edit. It's interesting because if you were to look at the original text, and I can provide the transcript if you're interested, like where they spoke, like there was a lot, like what Lucy said at the end, I put in the beginning and all of this, but I did want to keep in, like, I didn't want it to be like completely sanitized of all the ums and the ums and stuff, because when we first start out, I think we have like a very high criteria of like what sounds professional, and in reality, you don't have to have like the most superb audio quality to be able to produce something of value. So I left some of those in there because I also think they added some character. You got a real sense of the difference between who Lucy was compared to Megan, even based on their speech. You know, Megan didn't have like ums and Lucy did, right? So yeah.
Particularly for language teaching, we had a conference in sound last year, and in listening, and one of the key speaker mentioned how students are very good at that prepared, curated, sanitized listening exercises, but that the ums and the crutches and the repetitions and the I changed my mind, I'm gonna change the story.
Yeah.
Pose really a lot of difficulty for students in listening exercises. And they even had, I think, this research where they had the speaker say, I'm going to the market. And the students who listened to that exercise had so much trouble with the and students made up words, made up new grammar before realizing that the was just so I think it's in terms of language learning and having students listen more attentively to an interview that they did, or a text that they're using or a recording that they're using to incorporate into their podcast, because it makes them listen more attentively to natural speech.
Oh, that is so interesting.
Yes, I kind of agree. Personally, I do not like having a lot when I was listening to something. It's very destructive, and sometimes it's kind of annoying to me.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. It's a really interesting points of view in terms of like who your audience is, what your goals are. Definitely things to keep in mind. Yeah, cool. So speaking of podcasting and courses, I want to help identify 3 different ways that you can engage with podcasting in some way in your courses. The first is producing your own content, materials that you use for the course, which can be lectures, it can be, recordings of experiences, depending on what you're teaching. It could be lexicon, vocabulary lists, what have you. Another way that you can use podcasts in your courses are by assigning them as text. As one of the great things about podcasts, especially the ones that are interviews, is that they can act as primary sources often, primary text, depending on the subject matter, because you're interviewing someone in the moment, or the podcast is of an interview. So that's another way you can use them. And then the last is assigning students to make their own audio stories. And that's really where most of my experience has been through the multimedia labs. We're really set up to help the students succeed when the faculty might not be podcasters themselves, but that shouldn't stop anyone from having a media assignment in their course. So we're there to ensure that the students get the training that they need. So thinking about some of the advantages of what makes podcasting in courses, or actually just podcasts in general, so useful. For faculty, really it's the creation of the asynchronous resources. COVID has shown us that there's so many advantages to having asynchronous resources. It can really save instructors time, but it can also produce a more student-centered and driven environment. When a lecture or when a resource is in a podcast, it's really on the student to listen to it and decide when is best for their learning. And it's also something that's repeatable. A student can go back to that recording and listen to it. So a lot of instructors might use Zoom to record their lectures and provide that through Canvas, and that's kind of another form of this. So those are some of the advantages there. I will also say, in terms of other things that you could possibly be producing, like video, it's relatively easy and accessible. Video is podcasting ×2 because it's audio and image, and moving image at that, and podcasting is just audio. So if you're looking at a place to get started with media, podcasts are really a nice low barrier to entry. And then one of the last advantages is that it allows instructors to engage in the burgeoning field of digital humanities. We're all trying to figure out ways how we can take our pedagogy and our teaching and our subjects, into this kind of digital realm, and understand how technology can help us in this process of teaching, right? So by creating these digital resources, by creating, digital texts, it's just another way to branch out what you all do here at Brown. In terms of students, you'll see that there is some overlap in terms of the advantages, right? So they get a student-centered kind of experience. They get a different type of learning modality, which uses a different part of their brain. But it can also be really great for students that are commuters, like the ability to listen to a lecture or a text as they're walking to class, when they couldn't be watching a video because they might get hit by a car or something like that. It really allows them to be able to choose the optimal time in which they want to learn. It also provides students with an opportunity to really embody the material, especially if they're the ones making it. There's something to be said for writing as embodiment. That certainly does happen, but when you have to speak something out loud, it just hits differently. If you've ever written a letter that you couldn't actually say to someone, there's reasons why that is, right? So oftentimes podcasting can produce an empathetic response with the subject matter. It also is a way to increase retention of the subject matter because you're kind of dual processing it in different areas of your brain, both through your speech, but then also through the reading of the text. And lastly, it allows for a different way to process the material creatively. You are making something, and that kind of relationship is very different than kind of rote learning, if you will. It's also advantageous to assign students podcasting assignments because it helps them develop media literacy skills. And I can't tell you how important I think, especially from my background, where I'm coming from, how important this is for students. So many students nowadays are going into the workforce. It's not about like the degree that they got, or their understanding of the subject. It's what else can they bring to the employer, to the table. And if you're an anthropologist and like you could do qualitative research and you can do a podcast and you can run the Instagram and you can do all of these other things, it's that little bit of extra something that really makes the students competitive in the workforce. At least that's what I found with my students. When I check in with them a year after they graduate, 2 years after they graduate, a lot of them nailed the jobs because of all of the extracurricular things that they did that gained marketable skills. So that's another reason to consider using podcasts. And then lastly, by having students create podcasts, you are allowing them to increase the amount of diversity, equity, and inclusion that's in the field. Whenever there is and again, depending on the subject, but like, my background is technology studies, if you will. When I think about how disenfranchised people of color, queer people, differently abled people are, the ability for them to be able to contribute to that field through something like podcasts and just put more of their experience out there, really just helps everyone. So those are some of the ways that adding podcasting assignments and thinking about podcasting in your own teaching or research might be beneficial. Any questions about any of that? Cool. I know I threw a lot at you there. So speaking of, I wanted to highlight some work that we did with one of our instructors here at Brown, Jennifer Nazarino. Jennifer Nazarino is in public health as well as at the Nelson Entrepreneurship Center. And in 2019, she taught this class called Global Dynamics and Immigrant Entrepreneurship. And the thesis of that course was essentially that when we think of entrepreneurship, we really only think about Silicon Valley. We think about tech startups and things along those lines. And her argument was that every immigrant that has come to this country and started a business is an entrepreneur. And that's not what is thought of when you use that word. So she wanted to highlight that by having her students essentially connect with a local immigrant entrepreneur here in Providence that were starting their own businesses and what have you, and really get their story down through a podcast. So the podcasts that were assigned, they were interview-based. The students had to produce anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes worth of material in terms of the podcast. And the most important thing, I think, is that students had little to no experience with audio storytelling, recording, interviewing, even like what questions to ask, how to formulate the questions, and what have you. This was like a kind of a huge undertaking, but it also had this like really incredible story behind the effort. And one of the things that the class learned very quickly was that while podcasts are relatively easy and accessible, that they did take a bit of work. a bit of work. But in the end, it really seemed like the students found that it paid off. As it says here, I really started to appreciate the time and effort it takes to create a podcast series. So I have here for you a very short audio clip. Most of the interviews were about 15 to 17 minutes. I edited this down to just 1 minute and 14 seconds, but I did it so that you could get an idea of the kind of quality that students can produce without any real experience. And it'll start with Jennifer narrating, because she also decided that she wanted to model this technology. And we'll talk about that a little bit after you hear it.
The students provide a deep dive and intimate look into the lives of immigrant entrepreneurs. Hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, my name is Stephanie and welcome to the Immigrant Entrepreneurship Story Series. Today I interviewed Jessica Kim, a Brown alum and our current entrepreneur in residence at the Nelson Center. She has founded 3 ventures since college and she is currently the CEO of IonaCare, a virtual care team for caregivers of people enduring prolonged illnesses. Her continuous passion for entrepreneurship provide a very unique story for us today. Could you give a little overview of your entrepreneurial journey, like how you got where you are?
Yeah, sure. So I did not intend to be an entrepreneur. I actually didn't even know really what it was, but I loved studying people. And then it was really kind of one of those situations where I walked into a pizzeria and I saw a plate of banana bread being sold and I baked for fun. I would bake all my friends' birthday cakes and everything. And I just challenged the owner and I said, I could do so much better than that. And, you know, he said, bring it in, it sold out. And I made signs for it. I called it Jessica's Wonders. And his slogan was, so good, it'll make you wonder.
So that's just kind of a short sample of what her students were able to produce. And you probably heard varying different versions of audio quality. I think one of the things that really stuck out for me was that, like, Jennifer, who is, you know, an expert in her own right, in her own field, when she was actually trying to record, she had worse audio quality, right? There's a lot of plosives and, you know, and what have you. So it can be this interesting experience where, like, even though that students can sometimes, you put it so well the other day, Elsa, you were like, that like when students and faculty get together to do something, that sometimes it's the students that are able to produce more sometimes of the instructor.
Their grade depends on its own.
Right, exactly. That's true. But the fact that she was modeling it with her students and learning, like when we gave the workshops to her course, like she was there taking notes just like her students were. I really think it helped actually produce the motivation for the students to do well, because they knew it was going to be important and have a life afterwards. And then this last quote I thought was really nice that Jen provided me with, which was that what she found was that over time, her students really became invested in the craft of making the podcast. So it wasn't just about the interviews. They cared so much about their subjects. They really wanted the podcasts to pop. And so they started playing with sound. They started layering in things. They started thinking about, like, where's the joke and how do I edit it into this narrative type of thing. So that was really, really fun to work with her, and the students did a really excellent job. So now that we have seen an example, it's probably best to kind of break down what goes into making a podcast. Podcasting can be broken down into essentially 3 different sections: pre-production, production, and post-production. In general, production is everything related to recording. It's about getting the raw material that you need to be able to craft your story. And the crafting of that story is your post-production. And then pre-production is all of the logistics required to get that raw recording material. So some of the activities that might happen in pre-production is settling on your audience and the format of your podcast. Is it going to be an interview? Is it going to be a radio play? Is it for students? Is it for other instructors? Is it for children? Which is important on YouTube. Also, if it is going to be an interview, preparing some questions for an interview, right? Not going in just off the cuff, if you will. Or if it's going to be something more like an opinion type of piece, making sure that you're outlining and defining the themes of your podcast episode. What are the sections I want to hit, and organizing those things. And of course, there's scheduling logistics. Do I need to reserve a room? Do I need to find a time to meet with the person I'm interviewing? Do I need to rent out equipment for this? And then lastly, prepping the tech. All right, I have the equipment. Let me test it. Let me make sure I know how it works before the interview starts, right? In the next section, we have production. And again, this is pretty much everything that has to do with recording. So actually recording the interviews. But it's also about getting those recordings into a format that you can analyze and think about for what happens next. So that means transcribing your recordings all into text. So you can do that by hand. You can do that by literally listening and then writing down what you hear. You can use a bunch of different services, but it's really, really useful because that is where you get to leverage all of the skills that you've learned about writing papers into creating a script for your podcast. The other thing too is that transcribing text is great for accessibility, because when you are publishing your podcast, you should also publish a transcript so that people can follow along and read if they are hearing impaired, or if they just need to be able to review the text in some other manner other than listening. And then lastly, sourcing sounds for effects or background. So what I mean by that is, let's say you are interviewing a restaurant owner. You probably don't actually want to conduct the interview in their restaurant because it's going to be noisy, it's busy, you're going to hear all of this. But getting some of that noise might add some character at some point in your podcast when they're talking dramatically about how busy it is. Maybe you cut to this like clanging of pots and what have you. And then the last phase is post-production. So this is where the actual storytelling happens. And I think it's really important to note that anytime you're editing something, this is true of writing as well, but you are not a passive participant. If you are producing a podcast, you are telling a story. You're the storyteller. And so that's a very active role. So you need to make some decisions about how you're going to craft the narrative or what the story structure is going to be like. You're actually going to be editing the raw recordings into a final piece. You might also be doing something like recording narration. So you may have a story, but there's something missing in the recording that's out of context. So you record a narration to be able to explain what's happening. Or adding background music and then finally publishing. So this entire process is gone into a little bit more in depth in our podcasting resource, which I will show you now. So this is what we produce as kind of an external resource where we gathered all of our knowledge about podcasting. And as you can see, it is broken down into pre-production, production, post-production. And you can go through this and find all of these different types of ideas. So like in the section for finding ideas, what kind of podcast form does it take? Is it a topic or is it a story? Thoughts about telling stories about communities. We also have sections for preparing for interviews, things that you should kind of think about, resources for where you can generate certain interesting questions. Like a general thing is you want to ask open-ended questions. And by that, I mean, if I ask you, do you like chocolate ice cream? The answer is yes or no. If I ask you, tell me about the last time that you cried from ice cream or something like that, that's going to give you a story, right? So this resource is here for you to go through. And this is also the resource that we share with a lot of students. There's two things that I want to show you specifically. The first is under post-production, technical editing software. So this is our tutorial. If you're going to participate in the second workshop that we have happening next week, we'll be asking you to do this tutorial between now and then. It's about 26 minutes worth of tutorial. I'd comfortably give yourself about 45 minutes to accomplish it. And it will take you through the entire editing process, which is great. We also provide raw sound so that you can follow along with what's happening in the video. The other thing I'm going to draw your attention to is this link right here, which is the instructor toolkit. So I made this as a companion to our presentation today, and you'll actually find that a lot of it is some of the material that we've already gone through. So there's the So Why to Make a Podcast recording, talking about the 3 different ways that you can use podcasts in your courses. But there's also some additional sections here that we won't have time to go over, like podcasting assignment ideas, as well as how to set clear expectations about assignments. And we also have a podcasting rubric that you can use and adapt for your own syllabus. So this could be really, really useful, and please feel free to share this out with other instructors, either from Brown or elsewhere. I definitely designed this to be kind of as general as possible, with the Brown specific resources being at the bottom. And one of the ones that may be notable for you all is at the very, very bottom. Here you can sign up for a time to have a consultation with me if you'd like to talk more in depth about how to design a podcasting assignment for your course. You can just click on here, it'll give you my available times, and you can sign up, and then we'll meet and chat about things. Any questions about this so far? Oops. Yes.
I don't know as if it's so much of a question, but when we listened initially to your 8-minute podcast,
Yes.
and I think it was maybe the faculty member, no, maybe actually it was Lucy who talked about transcribing to find your quotes.
Yeah.
And I was like, why is she doing that? And then I'm like, then you're like, oh, that is part of production is to transcribe the video.
Yeah.
And like that makes total sense now, but I felt like, whoa, that's a lot of work to have to transcribe, because it brought me back to the day when I was like a starving grad student. I made extra money by transcribing German things at this German university. But it makes a lot of sense if you, like you said, if you need to provide the transcript in the end, and then the way you said that, something that Lucy said at the beginning of your interview, at the end of your interview ended up being at the beginning. Mm-hmm. That makes it really, you see it like it's your writing. Like, I guess you could do it with just, it's a good idea to transcribe.
Yeah, because it was interesting. For the process of that, I asked them relatively the same question.
Yeah.
And you heard that there was a lot of overlap in the content, but they chose to answer it at different questions. So it didn't line up, and I wanted it to line up. So that's one way that you're kind of storytelling. I will say there are ways now to automate your transcription. We have a few options up here, including O-Transcribe. Descript is also very useful. And you can also, there's a great hack using Google Docs where you enable the text-to-speech option, and you just play the audio recording, and it will just do text-to-speech, which is really nice. And so that becomes your transcript. But yeah, it's very useful. And again, most of us are used to like editing text, not audio. So you can start there and really figure out what your story is going to be.
Share the screen.
Oh, is it not shared?
Yeah. So that where?
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
I must have gotten out of share screen. My apologies. There we go.
And then one other question. So your podcasting resource guide was put on a Google site. And were you comfortable? Do you like that format? This is a little off topic, but just
I mean, I love Google Sites. The Google Sites, I could talk to you forever about this. Google Sites are fantastic because they allow you to focus on the content, because so much of the aesthetics are already determined. there's a little bit of flexibility, but not as much. And I find that sometimes when you get to something like Wix or like Squarespace, like you get so concerned about like everything looking right that you're not focused on the content. So I can whip one of these up really, really easily. I will say that there's been some talk about whether or not we should continue using them, because at one point, Google sites were blocked by China's infrastructure. But what's interesting is that when I look at the analytics, we actually have quite a few people accessing it from China. So I'm not sure how it's a question for sure. But in terms of ease, accessibility, the fact that you can add alt text very easily to all of the images, like it's a no-brainer for me. I love it. And all of our websites are on Google Sites. So yeah. Okay. So
on the transcribing text that you were mentioning, Jake, I think it's also really, I mean, thinking of our language classes, a good way for students to do different levels of listening, from like the focused listening of word, to also just looking for the main ideas, kind of word discourse analysis, or looking for main ideas, or looking for jokes, or looking for repetition, rephrasing of the same idea. So I think it's a really good listening exercise.
Yeah, and it also with retention, like I found that like I had to transcribe the text, then I had to look for quotes, then I had to make the quotes. I had to read the text 6 or 7 times just to start the podcasting process, right? Or the editing process. So I found it really useful.
So I did ask Leo how long the 8-minute podcast that you made had taken, because when I saw it, it was just so refined. I was like, oh, he must have spent a month. But
no, it probably took me 7 to 8 hours, but that's also including coming up with the idea and also pivoting. Because like some of the questions I asked, I realized that those aren't what I was looking for. So I had to re-ask some questions. I changed the approach as well. So about 7 to 8 hours, but it's now something that like I'll be able to send to any instructor that asks me. So it's well worth my time. And I probably had it not been one of the things that like just kind of popped up after like meeting with you, like if I was more focused on it, I probably could have done it in 5 to 6, so.
Which seems
approachable.
Pretty, reasonable for either us as instructors or even for an assignment that we expect from students.
Yeah, and I will say also too, like, on here for the instructor toolkit, when we go to the assignments, I have some recommendations of things that you can think about for assignments, so that like a good benchmark for a student would be to produce something that's 10 to 15 minutes, that you can expect them to spend 8 to 12 hours working on that one assignment, and that's just based on what we've seen in the past. So we're going to move into our activity. So for this, you're going to need your smartphones out. And I'm going to ask you to open either the Voice Memos app, or if you have an Android, the Smart Voice Recording app. So one of the great things about our cell phones is they can produce really good audio. In fact, actually, like almost all of NPR's podcasting that's interview-based is done using a phone. I recorded my narration for that 8-minute podcast using my phone. So they've got really, really great mics, and there's a few tips and tricks to optimize how good they record. So the first is, when you're recording, you want the speaker of your phone to be about 7 inches away from your face. That's about like 2 fists away from your face. And you want it to be at a 45-degree angle away. The reason is because we have certain consonants are like very, very harsh. So like P's tend to go for P plosives, and like S and T. By keeping this away from the actual mic, you minimize those sounds. So that's kind of how you record. So everyone will be utilizing or having the opportunity to practice this. And Elsa, I might ask you to pair up with Justin. And then if the two of you could pair up. So this is going to be the activity, and we also have something for our Zoom participants. But the first two things that you're going to do is pretty much the same. You're going to find a space to record in, somewhere here on this floor. You can go down to another floor. You want to try and find a place that you think is kind of quiet. Consider going into a restroom. Consider going into the stairwell. Yes. And once you find that space, you're each going to record 15 seconds of what we call room noise. So trying to be very, very quiet, you're just going to hit record, and you're just going to try to capture what you hear in the room. We'll be using that in a little bit to talk about what room noise is. Once you've done that, you're going to interview your partner. So you don't need to worry about recording you asking the question. You just want to capture your partner's response. And you're going to ask them one of the following questions. What is your favorite breakfast? Tell me about your worst parking experience. Or describe your favorite language phrase. And then I'm going to ask you, as the interviewer, to come up with your own original follow-up question. Once you have that recorded, you're just going to swap places. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. And for those on Zoom, you're going to do the same first two things. You're going to find a space to record in. You're going to record 15 minutes of room noise. And instead, you're going to record a voiceover. That includes your name, your title, your department, what you love about language studies, and what students can expect to learn from your course. And this will have to happen kind of quickly. So let's say 10 minutes. That sounds good. And feel free to take a picture of the slide if you need to. But yeah. All right, so how was that for everyone?
Fun.
Yeah, fun?
It was fun, yeah.
Good.
Interesting.
Like that. Okay. I will take fun and interesting. I like that. So did anyone find trouble or have trouble finding a quiet space to record in?
I think we're used to the space,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit noise there, but
Yeah.
we think it's quiet enough to make a conversation.
Okay, I like that.
Where did you go?
Good
Right
question.
over there, near the window.
Oh, in the corner.
Mhm.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
We went to the stairs.
Yeah.
And we thought we had nailed the space. Except halfway, well, that, we were like,
Oh, did
let's
someone
open
come
the
walking
stairs.
down?
Someone opened it. This never happens, but someone decided to not take the elevator, take the stairs in the middle of our interview. So, yeah.
So, right, so like the space is kind of important, right? So I wanted to share that there are some places on campus where you can do some recording. But at the same time, Brown doesn't have like dedicated like audio recording spaces. So these are all a little makeshift. The first is actually at the Nelson Entrepreneurship Center, which is right up on there. They have these like little booths that are used for like one-person Zoom calls or what have you. They're not really sound treated per se, but they can be a good, relatively quiet place to do something like a voiceover narration. They're too small though for two people. So, and I've already checked with them. They're not like meant for audio recording, but they don't mind if people come and use it for that. So that's a great spot. The Rock Library also has a media booth that is available. And it is somewhat sound treated a little bit. And I will say that their service is a little like hidden, like it's not on their website. You kind of have to go and ask the front desk person. Like, I'm not sure if there's a training involved or not, but I know that a lot of people, once they do get in and they find out what the deal is, they like recording there. And then the last is our grad studio at the Multimedia Labs. This is set up really for video recording, But if you bring in your own audio recorder, it can be a great place to record because it is sound treated. It's not completely soundproof, but it's sound treated. And it's reservable 24/7. And all you have to do is go through a training, and then we'll get you access to the space, and then you can put on your reservation calendar. So that can be a great spot. If you're thinking about really taking this on and you're like, I really need to figure out how to record in my own space, we do have some options for that. The next section is going to be about, setting up, your own kind of home office recording studio. And so the man in this picture is Ira Glass, who is the radio producer of This American Life. And he actually records a lot of his podcasts in his closet, which is funny, but actually closets are like one of the #1 places where you should record, you should think about recording. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to kind of understand our environment a little bit. When you are recording audio, you want to avoid a lot of echoes. You want to avoid lots of noise. So you want to stay away from spaces that are completely barren, lots of windows, wood floors. If you've ever walked into like a brand new apartment or like leaving your apartment once it's empty and like you can hear every creak and sound, that's why you want to avoid that, because it just travels. What you do want to go for is anything that's got like a lot of fluff. If you've got blankets, rugs, that's why closets can be so great, because all of that fabric helps absorb unwanted sound. So one of the things that you can do when trying to figure out what the sonics of your room is actually an activity that you already did, which is record those 15 seconds of room noise. So did you guys listen back at all to those recordings?
Or just what we listened to with you?
So I'd like you to go back to your 15 seconds and go put it to your ear and listen. And what is it that you hear?
It's also the background humming. It's like it's the big building with the fans and the vents.
So you're hearing the HVAC system in your background.
And also, and I noticed this when we were recording, there's like a tapping sound that at the time I was like, I think those are my shoes, just for me like standing.
Really?
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
But I can't locate the sound.
Interesting. So a funny thing, our brain filters out a lot of what we hear, right? So we may believe that we are in a silent space, but in actuality, we're not. And one of the best ways to kind of counteract that act of the brain is to take these recordings and then be able to listen to them actively. And you might hear like, oh, I can hear this humming. It's the HVAC, right? So the question that you want to ask yourself is like, of the sounds that I'm hearing, how much of it can I control? Am I hearing my refrigerator buzzing? Can I unplug my refrigerator for 20 minutes and then set an alarm to make sure I plug it back in, right? Is there a fan going off? Can I turn that off? Is there like a light that's buzzing, right? So figuring out what you can control in your environment to make the soundscape better is very important. There's also going to be things that you cannot control, right? So every space usually has like a sound schedule, I will call it, right? So if you're in your apartment and your upstairs neighbors have kids, maybe the morning isn't going to be a great time to record because they're going to be running around, grabbing breakfast, if you are next to a bus line, that has commuters coming at 5 o'clock, maybe that 5 p.m. is not a great time. So the things that you can control, that you cannot control, see if they happen regularly, and then you can avoid those times and report them. So when thinking about setting up your studio, the most important thing to audio quality within a podcasting episode, as well as throughout a series, is consistency. You can have the same mic, the same perceived setup, but if you do it in a large room versus a small room, if you do it in this corner versus the center of the room, the sonics all change. So you want to ask yourself, what can I do consistently? consistently. Can I dedicate space to this? Do I have a spare bedroom? Do I have a closet that I'm not using? And if you don't have space that you can dedicate, then what setup can I produce that is easy to set up and take down that I can do consistently? So some of the options, as I said, if you don't have a complete separate room, a closet can be fantastic, but also blanket forts. Like, it sounds funny, but a lot of people actually do this, where they get chairs, they put a large comforter over their heads. You want to make sure that you're doing it on a rug so that you're not getting lots of echoes from like a wood floor. But it works incredibly well. Another component of your studio that you're going to need is a recording device. Now, there is a more in-depth resource on the podcasting resource guide for the same DIY setting up your studio. So I'm not going to go super in-depth, but know that you can go there and we actually link out to a few recommendations based on what you need. But essentially, there's 3 different types of microphones that you can look at. USB mics, which are great and plug and play with most computers, but you do need a computer to record. So they might not be great in the field if you're hoping to do like, Billy on the street or something like that. There's also audio recorders like the Zoom HN1, which is like an independent recorder. They can be the best of both worlds because you can take them out in the field. They're small, they fit in your pocket, but you can also connect them to your computer when you want to do that. And then the last one is your smartphone, which after today, I'm hoping some of you learn that like you can actually get pretty good quality out of your smartphone. And if you are here at Brown, which everyone is, we do have an IT service center, which is on the 5th floor, Page Robinson. And through them, we provide some audio recording equipment, including the Zoom HN1. So if you really want to get like great quality and it's an important recording, you can take things out for, I think, 2 or 3 days at a time with them, which is great. And lastly, you want to think about what are some other ways that you can add some soundproofing or increase the sound quality to your studio. So on the top right is a setup that is called a baffle, and that's a professional baffle. And it's set up in such a way, essentially it's like this like very high dense acoustic foam that's set behind your mic, and it's just supposed to absorb all of the stray sounds, and they work really well. I think there might actually be one in the recording booth, right? And they can be kind of expensive and annoying to set up, but you can also, there's lots of DIY options. So here is an example of like a collapsible folding cube, like from Target or what have you, and then just filling it with some foam. That works really, really well. If you don't have a collapsible cube, an Amazon box that you're not using, just tape or staple some like old towels like to the inside of it and then record through there. So there's lots of cost-effective ways that you can really improve your sound quality. And then the last thing that I absolutely recommend, whether you're using your smartphone or other recorders, is invest in a pop filter. Pop filters are just these large round screens that go in between the speaker's mouth and the recording device, and they help eliminate those P plosives and the harsh S's and T's. And they're only about $15, so they're really worth it, especially if you don't have to do all of this editing in post to fix the audio. So yeah, so that's pretty much what I have for you. You feel free to take a picture of this with the info and resources. That's my email if you want to email me directly, as well as a link to the general podcasting guide and then the specific toolkit for instructors. And then next week, we're going to be having the second part of the workshop where in between now and then, if you're interested in participating, you can do that tutorial that I showed you online. And you can come in and I will essentially be on hand to answer any of your technical questions. So if you got stuck somewhere, I can help you get through that. If you finished it and you got really excited, you're like, oh, but now I want to do this, this, and that, I can help you with that as well. And in fact, if you're really interested, I would challenge you after doing the tutorial, use the audio that you collected today from your partner and turn it into a short 40-second podcast of your own. Maybe add some narration, find some background music if they're talking about, bacon is their favorite breakfast food, maybe get some sizzling bacon sounds, and really play with it and challenge yourself to kind of do that.